I shouldn't be alive. I know that now. Not because someone told me, but because I remember the moment I should have left this world. I remember the silence, the collapse, the way everything inside me shut down while something that didn't feel like me watched from the outside. Before any of that, I was someone else entirely. Or maybe I was no one at all. They gave me a name the day I was born, wrapped in soft silks and expectations. I was the daughter of a powerful man. My cradle rocked in the shadows of palaces. Men bowed before my father. Women whispered my mother's name like a spell. I was told I had everything. And yet, I remember a kind of hunger no one saw when. That nod from the inside. In our house, silence had many sounds. The click of polished shoes on marble. The rustle of veils. The distant hum of locked doors being opened only from the outside. I learned early to smile without showing teeth. To speak without saying anything. To obey without thought. I became a master of invisibility. But invisible things grow wild in the dark. At 15, I found an old book beneath my uncle's bed. It was not meant for me. The pages smelled like dust and secrets. Inside, a world where women spoke their minds and were not punished for it. I didn't understand the words at first, but my fingers learned them. My eyes followed. My soul remembered. That was when it started. The trembling, the ache in my chest that came at night. I wasn't sick. But something was cracking beneath my ribs, a kind of knowing I didn't have a name for. I would lie in bed, the ceiling spinning, and feel something calling me from beyond everything I was allowed to believe in. I didn't tell anyone, not because I was afraid of what they'd say, but because I already knew what they'd do. At 17, I was sent to Paris to study. They called it a gift, a reward for my obedience. But I knew better. I had asked too many questions. I had spoken too freely in front of a family friend, and the look in my father's eyes that night said it all. Send her away, before she contaminates the others. In Paris, the air tasted different. People laughed loudly. Women wore colors. Men held hands in the open. I walked like someone learning to use her legs for the first time. And every night, I wrote in my journal not about boys or fashion or music, but about the ache that had become a fire. There were words inside me I had never spoken, visions that came in dreams, faces I'd never seen, but somehow recognized. One of them, always the same, a woman with silver eyes standing in a field of light. She never said a word, but she watched me like she knew, like she remembered something I hadn't lived yet. I stopped going to class. I wandered parks. I sat in churches not to pray, but to listen, not to the priest, but to the silence behind his words. I felt something there, in the stillness, not a god, not a name, just presence, vast, patient, waiting. I knew I had crossed a line when I started drawing her, this woman from my dreams. Page after page. Sometimes she held a flame, other times a mirror. One night, I wrote, "She is what they tried to hide from me." Then came the call. My mother was ill. I was to return immediately. No questions. At the airport, I hesitated. My passport felt like a stone in my hand. Something told me, this is not a return. This is a trap. But I went, because somewhere, I still believed there was a version of home that could accept who I was becoming. I arrived at night. The house was too quiet. My mother didn't come to greet me. My father didn't even pretend to smile. At dinner, no one touched their food. Eyes darted. Words floated just above the surface, but none were spoken. I felt it in my chest again, not the fire but ice. That night, they came into my room. I remember the sound of the door locking, the whisper of my father's prayer, the look in my cousin's eyes, something between guilt and fury. They had found the journal, the drawings, the name I had begun calling myself in secret. I don't remember the first blow, only the smell of my own blood. Time fractured. I saw the ceiling split into shards. I felt my soul being peeled from my body like silk from bone. Someone screamed. It might have been me. It might not. Then nothing. But not empty nothing. Not the void they speak of. This was something else. A soft white. Not light, not space. But a kind of memory I stepped into. I didn't have a body. I didn't have a voice. But I existed. And something else was there. Too, not a person, not a presence in the way we understand it. Just awareness, a warmth. It wrapped around me like a question I had waited my entire life to be asked. Are you ready to see who you are? I don't know how long I was there. There was no time, only unfolding, only remembering, only returning to something I had never been taught, but always carried. I saw my mother young, before the weight. I saw my father laughing, holding me in his arms before power hardened his face. I saw a version of myself, free, barefoot, in the sand, eyes full of sky. Then I saw her. The woman with silver eyes, only this time she spoke. Not in words, but in something deeper. A knowing. A vibration. She reached out her hand, and I felt every wound I had buried rise to the surface. Like steam. She didn't heal me. She didn't promise salvation. She simply saw me. And in that seeing, I became real. I wanted to stay. I wanted to dissolve into her, into that field, into that light. But she stepped back. Her hand lowered. And the voice, this time clear and absolute, said, now that you know who you are, will you return and carry it? I said nothing. But something in me nodded. Then came the fall. Like being pulled through myself. Through pain. Through the scream I hadn't released. Through the silence they had forced on me. I fell back into the weight of flesh. Into the cage of ribs. Into the pressure of lungs reawakening. And suddenly breath. Light. Noise. And the world again. But not the same world. Not the same me. Because when I woke up, everything I had once believed to be real had vanished. And what I had seen would never let me go. She was born behind tall walls and under golden ceilings. In a house where light never quite reached the corners. They called it a home, but it felt more like a museum, sterile, silent, full of artifacts and rules. Even the air was controlled. The scent of jasmine lingered not because it grew nearby, but because it was sprayed, precisely, at the same hour each day. Nothing in that house happened by accident. Her earliest memories weren't of toys or lullabies, but of glances long, careful stares from adults who watched her as if she might break the family by simply breathing wrong. They dressed her in silk before she could walk, taught her to bow her head before she could speak. Stillness is power, her mother whispered one night, brushing her hair 100 times. The world does not need to know your thoughts, so she stopped having them. At least. That's how it felt. Like something inside her folded in on itself. She became quiet, precise, polished. A perfect little mirror of what they wanted. Her father, when he was home, rarely spoke to her unless it was to correct. A tilt of the chin. A nod. Disapproval came not in words, but in the absence of acknowledgement. He was a man of diplomacy, power, expectation. She loved him from a distance. The way someone might love a constellation, beautiful, unreachable, and always slightly out of position. Her mother was harder to understand. There were moments, fleeting ones, where softness emerged. A hand on her back during prayer. A lingering look during a recital. But the softness never stayed. It was like fog. The next morning, the same cold instructions would return. Sit straighter, smile smaller, speak less. They lived in a world of appearances, where love was not expressed, but assumed. And punishment was never loud, it was cold. Withdrawal. Silence. Doors that closed without a sound, but left thunder in their wake. Still. She survived. She learned how to read a room by the movement of shoulders. How to know if a dinner had gone well by the sound of a single fork being set down. Her body became fluent in tension, her smile an expert forgery. She existed between glances, in the shadows of larger decisions made by people with important titles. But in private, she built a secret world. Behind the curtains of her bedroom, beneath the piles of approved school books, she kept treasures. A small journal with a cracked leather spine. A collection of seashells she'd found on a forbidden trip to the Red Sea. Pages torn from magazines smuggled to her by a nanny who used to be a dancer in Cairo. These were her portals. Her hidden seeds. She didn't write much at first, just small things. I felt like I'm made of glass. I had a dream where I was running and no one could catch me. Why does the moon always look so sad? But slowly, her words grew teeth. She began to question. Not aloud. Never aloud, but in ink. Why do I have to cover my voice? Why does my father never laugh? Why does my mother cry in the bathroom when she thinks no one hears? What kind of God needs silence to stay in control? It was around 13 when the dreams began. They came quietly at first. A field. A woman. Silver eyes, no voice. Just presence. But each time, the dream stayed longer, more vivid. The woman never moved. She just stood there, watching, waiting, like a lighthouse in a storm she hadn't yet entered. By 14, Lena knew the field better than her own home. It wasn't a memory. But it wasn't imagination either. The grass moved without wind. The sky had no sun, yet everything glowed. And always that feeling of being known completely. She never told anyone. She knew better. When her cousin was caught kissing a boy behind the gardens, she disappeared. For a year. When her aunt asked too many questions at dinner, she stopped being invited. The rules weren't written, but they were enforced with terrifying precision. So she played her part. The obedient daughter. The good student. The silent shadow in a house that only wanted reflections. Until Paris. Her father announced it at dinner. One evening without looking at her. You'll attend the Sorbonne. Literature. It's a respected program. No one asked if she wanted to go. But something inside her stirred. Literature meant stories. Stories meant escape. When the plane lifted off the ground, she felt her lungs expand for the first time in years. Paris was chaotic and unfiltered. People touched, laughed, swore, cried in public. Lena walked the streets in awe. Here, she wasn't her father's daughter. She wasn't anyone. And for the first time in her life, she could breathe without measuring it. She wore colors. Listened to music with lyrics that spoke of longing, rebellion, and joy. She read banned books in coffee shops that smelled of burnt espresso and rain. She started to write again, not just in her journal, but in notebooks she kept hidden under her mattress. She wrote about the dreams, about the woman, about the silence she grew up in, and the scream that had lived in her throat since childhood. Sometimes, the words poured out so fast her hand cramped. Other times, she'd sit for hours, just listening to the hum of the city, waiting for the ache inside her to become language. She met others too, people who had escaped their own cages, some spiritual, some political, some personal. They talked about freedom not as a slogan, but as breath, as sacred, as survival. One girl, Soraya, became a mirror for her. Iranian, fierce, tender, full of stories and rage. Soraya introduced her to a professor who hosted underground philosophy circles. There, Lena read about consciousness, transcendence, the nature of self beyond culture or name. She felt herself unfolding like an ancient scroll no one had dared read before. But the ache never left. Even in Paris, it stayed. Softer, quieter. But there, she began drawing the woman against silver eyes, cloaked in light. Each time, the image became sharper, as if she was remembering, not imagining. One night, in a dream, the woman reached out her hand. When Lena touched it, she woke up crying. Something had shifted. Not dramatically, but permanently. She no longer feared who she was becoming. She craved it. She changed her name in private. Just a whisper. Just for herself. A name she found in an old poem, meaning the one who sees. She felt free. But freedom, in her world, always had a cost. The letter came in the spring. Her mother was ill. Very ill. She must return immediately. Her absence had been noted. Her behavior questioned. It was not a request. She stood in the apartment doorway, passport in hand, knowing the choice wasn't real. Either return, or vanish completely. She packed her things in silence, burned a few pages from her journal, kept only one drawing of the woman, tucked it into the lining of her coat, and boarded the flight. The city disappeared beneath her like a story ending before its final chapter. She stared out the window, heart pounding, as the clouds swallowed the light. She didn't know it yet, but she would never return to Paris. Not like that. Not as that version of herself. That version, wild, aching, half-free, was already fading. She was going home. But the girl they expected was already gone. The city was hotter than she remembered. The kind of heat that wrapped itself around your bones and whispered warnings beneath your skin. Dust clung to the air. Even the sky seemed weighed down. As the car passed through the gates of her family's estate, something inside her tightened. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. Like a prisoner returning to the sound of her own chains. She stepped out of the car and looked up at the house. Nothing had changed. Not the carved wooden doors. Not the lattice windows. Not the silence. Especially not the silence. It pressed against her skin like old grief. She had spent years trying to forget this place. But now, every breath felt like a memory crawling back to reclaim her. Her mother wasn't at the door. A servant took her suitcase and led her inside. The hall smelled like lemon oil and sterilized history. Her footsteps echoed. No voices, no hugs. Just the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the corridor. She found her father in his study. He didn't stand when she entered. He didn't. "Look up. You came," he said simply. "I did. Your mother is resting." Silence. He finally raised his eyes. There was no warmth in them, only calculation, like he was studying a stranger who resembled someone he used to know. "We'll talk after dinner," he said, then turned back to his papers. Dinner was a ritual, just like everything else. Her mother sat across from her, eyes tired, hands trembling, slightly as she reached for her glass. No one spoke of illness. No one spoke of Paris. Instead, there were murmured updates about cousins she hadn't seen in years. Political news, economic forecasts, every subject except the one sitting silently at the table between them. Lena barely touched her. Fudushi felt watched, not by her parents but by the walls themselves. Like the house knew something she didn't. That night, in her old bedroom, she found the air thinner. Everything was exactly where she had left it: the bookshelf, the dressing table, the silk curtains. But it all felt like a stage, as if someone had rebuilt the set of her childhood just to remind her who she used to be. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened her suitcase. She hadn't brought much. Some clothes, her notebooks, a single photograph of the field she'd once drawn from a dream, and the small, folded paper where she had written the name she had chosen for herself. As she unfolded it, a soft knock came at the door. Her cousin entered without waiting for permission. He had always been kind to her, quiet, observant. They had grown up together, sharing glances across family dinners and whispered jokes behind pillars. But tonight, something in his eyes was different. "I need to ask you something," he said, his voice low. She nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. Her heart stopped. It was hers, the one she thought she had left behind in Paris, the one filled with sketches of the woman with silver eyes, with thoughts she hadn't dared speak aloud, with the name. "I found this in the library," he said. Behind the atlas. She didn't speak. "Couldn't I read it?" he continued. "Not all of it, but enough." His hands shook. "They'll see this as betrayal." The room tilted. Her mouth went dry. A chill swept through her spine despite the heat. "I had to tell them," he whispered. "I didn't want to, but they already suspected. They were watching you." She looked at him, then really looked, and realized he was not warning her. He was confessing. Footsteps outside, a shadow under the door. He turned away, ashamed. "I'm sorry." Then he was gone. The door closed. Locked. She stood frozen. The silence screamed. Seconds stretched. Then it began. A key turned. The door opened. 3 men stepped in. Her father, an uncle, and a third she didn't recognize. None of them spoke. Her father held the notebook in his hands. It looked small there, fragile, like her. He placed it on the dresser. Then turned and struck her. The first blow was open-handed, not hard, but devastating. Not because of the pain, but because it shattered the last illusion she carried. That somewhere, beneath all the control, there had been love. She stumbled, caught herself. The second blow came faster. This one from the stranger. Closed fist. To the stomach. The wind left her body. She fell to her knees. The room became water. She heard her mother's voice far away, like a dream pleading from behind the wall. Then silence again. Hands grabbed her, dragged her. She didn't fight. What would be the point? They needed to make her forget who she had become, or punish her for it. She remembered the floor. Cool marble against her cheek. Blood in her mouth. The sharp taste of betrayal. Then nothing. Not black. Not unconsciousness. Just the absence of time. As if the clock had stopped. Her last thought before slipping away wasn't of pain. It was of the woman with silver eyes, and how she had once whispered, "They will try to silence you. Let them." Silence is only the beginning. She fell, but she didn't fall alone. The hospital room was white. Too white, everything buzzed. Machines, lights, people moving in slow motion. Blood pressure dropping. Pupil response weak. Get the scan, now. Voices without faces. Hands pressing. Tubes inserted. A heartbeat flatlining. Then returning. Weekly, she's stable. For now. A nurse touched her hand. Paused. Whispered something under her breath. No. One saw the tear roll down Lena's cheek. Somewhere beyond the machines. Beyond the body that no longer moved, she drifted. Not up. Not down. But inward. Towards something waiting. Something ancient. And as the world of the living tried to keep her here, she crossed into the one that had always called her name. There was no tunnel. No bright flash. No voices calling her home. Just silence. Vast, infinite, soft. It wasn't darkness. And it wasn't light. It was something else entirely. A space so quiet that it felt alive. Breathing. Listening. Holding her without arms. Time no longer moved in lines. It pulsed. Spiraled. Collapsed. She became aware of herself not as a body, but as presence. An outline of thought. A thread of memory floating in a sea without beginning. She didn't panic. Because there was nothing to resist. Only surrender. Only stillness. And then sound. Not a voice. Not music. A vibration. Low at first. Like the hum of the earth before an earthquake. It resonated inside her if inside still meant anything. The sound grew. Became colors. Not colors she knew, but emotions in light form. Shades of longing. Flashes of recognition. Warm pulses of safety, grief, wonder. She drifted through it all like a child through warm water. Weightless and held. Then came the scent. It was unlike anything she had ever known. Not floral. Not earthly. But ancient. Like the memory of fire before fire was ever discovered. It wrapped around her, inviting her forward not with command, but with invitation. And so she followed. No feet. No motion. Just the knowing that one place was giving way to another. Suddenly, a field. Not one of grass or flowers, but of energy soft. And rippling like silk over the surface of the soul, she floated above it. Or within it, or both. Shapes began to form in the mist. Not figures. More like truths made visible. Moments from her life played out around her not as flashbacks, but as impressions. She could feel her 7th birthday again, the sting of being told she was too loud for a girl. She could feel the chill of her first lie, the weight of pretending, the ache of every silent dinner. But she didn't relive them. She observed them. Without pain. Without judgment. Only clarity. Each moment dissolved gently. Like ink in water. Then dashed another presence. Not coming toward her, but emerging from within the field. It didn't have a face. It didn't need one. She knew. It not like we know people, but like we know gravity. Like we know the beat of our own heart. It didn't speak, but its thought enveloped her completely. You are not what they named you. And suddenly, she remembered everything, not the life she lived, but something deeper. A knowledge behind the bones. She saw a version of herself made of light and wind and old song. She remembered standing in a circle of women, all draped in silver, holding something that pulsed like stars. She remembered choosing this life. Choosing. Forgetting, so that she might one day remember fully. Tears came not as drops, but as vibrations. Ripples in her essence. The presence moved closer, and with it came understanding. They feared your voice because it carried what they tried to bury, and Lena saw it. Not just her own lineage, but generations. Women who had swallowed screams. Daughters taught to disappear. Mothers who bled into silence so their sons could shine. And through all of them, a single thread, the light that survived. The presence shifted again. And suddenly she was no longer floating. She was walking, bare, feet a ground that glowed beneath each step. She didn't know where she was going, only that she was being drawn. Then, there she was, the woman, the one from the dreams, standing in the middle of the field, eyes silver, cloaked in wind and something more ancient than time. She didn't move, didn't speak, but Lena felt her entire being tremble, not in fear. In recognition. The woman raised her hand, and in it, a mirror, not made of glass, made of memory. Lena looked into it and saw herself. Not the body in the hospital bed. Not the girl from Paris. Not the obedient daughter, but the original self. Wild. Unbound. Made of flame and rhythm and storm. She wanted to fall to her knees, but the woman shook her head. You must stand. You came to remember, not to worship. Then came the question. Not with words, but with silence that burned. Will you return and carry this truth? She didn't answer right away. She looked around. At the field. At the woman. At the glowing path behind her. Returning meant pain. Returning meant blood and betrayal and loneliness. But returning also meant voice, and she remembered the girl who used to write under the covers. The one who asked the moon why it looked so sad. That girl deserved to finish her story. Lena lifted her chin. The woman nodded. And then the light began to dissolve. The field melted into itself. The presence faded. The sound slowed. And everything folded. Not like a door closing, but like a breath releasing. And she was falling. Falling through warmth. Falling through sound. Falling through the last echo of silence. And then the beep of a monitor. The sharp sting of oxygen. The pull of gravity. And the first unbearable weight of being inside a body again. There was no breath. Only awareness. And in that awareness, a stillness so complete. It held everything. Her pain. Her past. Her body left behind. She wasn't floating anymore. She was standing. Or what felt like standing. No feet. No ground. Just posture. Intention. Around her stretched a landscape unlike any she had ever known. A field without horizon. Where color moved like emotion and the air shimmered as if made from memory. Not sky. Not land. Just experience, unfolded. And in the center of that landscape, waiting without waiting, was her. The woman with silver eyes. She didn't need to ask who she was. She knew. Not from words. From recognition deeper than language. She had no age, no race, no expression. Yet somehow, she held them all. She was mother and mirror, flame and ocean, wound and healing. Lena wanted to fall to her knees, but her body, if this presence could still be called a body, wouldn't move that way. Not out of disrespect, but because kneeling was unnecessary here. There was no worship, only reflection. And the woman reflected everything, not just who Lena had been, but who she had tried to become, who she had abandoned, who she had feared, and who had waited for her all along. She came closer, not with steps, with presence, with permission, with light that didn't blind but revealed. Lena felt the silence break, not from a sound, but from a thought placed gently into her consciousness. You've come far to remember. The voice wasn't heard. It was known. She nodded, or thought she did. The woman extended her hand. In it, a small sphere, glowing. It pulsed. Like a heartbeat, like a seed, like a memory trying to be born. Touch it, the thought said. Lena reached out. The moment her essence touched the sphere, everything unraveled. She was no longer in the field. She was everywhere. She was her mother at 16, hiding tears behind a closed door. She was her father as a boy, trembling as he recited verses he did not believe. She was her grandmother, burying poems in the sand so no one would find them. She was a line of women stretching back centuries, each holding the next by a thread of silence. And yet she was also the flame they carried, the one no violence could extinguish. She gasped, if gasping were possible. The woman was beside her again. You were not broken. You were buried. And then came the mirror, the same one from before, but this time, it hovered in the air. Waiting. Lena looked, and saw herself, yes. But also she saw the version of herself she could have been, had she never learned to shrink. She saw herself singing, laughing without looking over her shoulder, holding the hands of people who didn't ask her to dim, dancing under a sky that didn't need permission. She saw the unlived life, not as a wound, but as an invitation. The woman stepped closer. Her silver eyes, endless galaxies. You can still choose her. And Lena wept, not because of loss, but because of the forgiveness she felt pouring over her from a place she never knew existed. It wasn't that someone forgave her. It was that she forgave herself. For the silence, for the fear, for the years spent pretending not to burn. She placed her hands against the mirror. The glass rippled. She stepped through. On the other side, she wasn't alone. There were others. Figures of light and memory. Some familiar, some not, but all connected. They stood in a circle, and at the center, not a throne, not a cross, not a symbol, but a single flame. And the flame sang, not with sound, with truth. It told her, you were not sent to obey. You were sent to ignite, to remember, to embody, to wake others up with the sound of your voice. Then the woman placed her hand on Lena's chest, and Lena saw everything, the day she would wake, the faces who would fear her. The exile, the loneliness, the power, the words she would one day speak in rooms filled with silence, the souls that would find themselves in her story, and the flame that would never, ever leave her again. The woman smiled, not with lips, but with light itself. And then, she said the only words Lena would remember clearly when she returned: "You are not theirs. You are not lost. You are not late." And then she faded. But not in sorrow. In completion. Like the final note of a song perfectly sung. The field dimmed. The colors returned to vibration. The silence wrapped around her like a shawl. And Lena, once girl, now flame, closed her eyes. Ready not to escape, but to return. Because now she remembered who she was, and what she carried. It started with sound. Not voices. Not words. Just a rhythmic beeping. Sharp, constant, mechanical. Then came weight, the crushing, suffocating heaviness of a body too tight for what it now contained. Her first breath was a war. Air clawed its way into lungs that felt like stone. Muscles spasmed. Skin prickled. Pain returned, ancient and immediate. Like fire beneath the surface. She tried to move. Her fingers wouldn't obey. She tried to speak. Her throat was raw, sealed by silence. Then came the flood. Voices, lights, cold metal. She's awake. Get the doctor now. Hands, faces, shadows. Lena blinked once, twice, and the ceiling above her came into focus. White, sterile, humming. The world she had left behind. Her body screamed without sound. The door burst open. A nurse. A doctor. Machines moved around her like insects. A light shone into her pupils. The doctor said her name. But it wasn't her name anymore. Still, she responded. Not with speech, but with a tear. A single line of salt down her cheek. The nurse noticed. Paused. Her hand touched Lena's. And for a brief moment, there was stillness again. Then chaos resumed. Hours passed. Maybe days. She drifted between sleep and consciousness. Time had become a rough thread, uneven, breaking, stitching back again. In dreams, the woman with silver eyes stood at the edge of her bed, silent, watching, no longer calling, just witnessing. On the third day, she whispered, "Water." Her voice was broken, hollow, but it returned. The nurse wept when she heard it. "You're a miracle," she said, squeezing her hand. But Lena didn't feel like a miracle. She felt like a stranger in borrowed flesh. Everything about her body was unfamiliar. The smell of antiseptic, the tubes in her arms, the cold rails of the bed. And yet, something burned inside her. Not pain, not fear. Knowing. She remembered everything. Not just the field, not just the woman, but the truth behind her silence, the weight of generations, the echo of a voice that refused to die. They hadn't silenced her. They had awakened her. The doctors came with questions. "Do you remember what happened? Do you know your name? Do you know where you are?" She answered only what mattered. "I came back." They thought she meant from the coma. They didn't understand. She didn't expect them to. Days later, her mother appeared, pale, smaller than she remembered. Eyes ringed in darkness. She stood at the doorway, afraid to enter. When she finally stepped in, she said nothing at first. Just sat by the bed. Looked at her daughter like she was a ghost. "I didn't know," she whispered eventually. "I didn't know what they would do." Lena didn't respond. Her mother reached for her hand, but stopped short. "I was told you fell." A pause. "I didn't believe it." Silence stretched. Then Lena spoke. "You were a girl once." Her mother looked up, startled. "You used to hide poems behind the water tank on the roof." Her eyes widened. "You wrote about the ocean, about running away." A tremor passed through her. How do you know that?" "I saw you," Lena said softly. "Where I was. I saw the girl you buried." Tears came fast, violent. Her mother bent over, shaking, clutching her own body like it might shatter. "I tried," she sobbed. "I tried to keep you safe." Lena watched her with strange calm. "You taught me how to disappear," she said. "But I remembered." Her mother looked at her like she was seeing something holy, something terrifying. Then she stood, left, Without another word, Lena never saw her again. They transferred her a week later, quietly. Without explanation. An uncle arranged the flight. Papers were signed. No reporters. No funerals. No police. Just silence. As always, she arrived in Istanbul. Under a different name. A small apartment. A new ID. A woman who brought groceries once a week and never asked questions. She could walk again within a month. Her body remembered pain, but her spirit remembered the light, and it burned through every part of her that once obeyed. In the quiet nights, she sat by the window and whispered the name she had given herself before they took it. Not her old name, the real one. The one whispered to her in the field of energy. The one that meant she who carries flame. And the mirror, that sacred mirror from her vision, now lived inside her eyes. Everywhere she looked, she saw differently. She saw the girl in the market trying to fold herself into nothing. She saw the old man on the tram gripping a prayer bead with shaking hands. She saw the woman crying behind sunglasses in a cafe, and she wanted to tell them all, "I remember you." One morning, she woke with fire in her chest. She wrote for 12 hours straight. Pages and pages. Not poetry. Not confession. But witness. She told the story not as a victim, not as revenge, but as a remembrance. She changed the names, but not the truths. And when it was done, she published it anonymously. Online. Just a voice in the dark. But voices in the dark always find listeners. Within a week, hundreds of messages, from women, from men, from souls who had nearly drowned in silence, just like she had. They wrote, "I thought I was alone. This feels like my life." "How did you survive?" She responded only once. "I didn't survive," she typed. "I returned." Freedom, she quickly learned, was not peace. It was exposure. Every morning, Lena woke in a new country, with a new name, and a soul that no longer fit inside her chest. The apartment was small. No mirrors. Just a single window, a narrow bed, and a wooden desk. It was quiet, but not the dangerous kind of quiet she had grown up with. This quiet hummed. It had movement, like wind breathing through a tight space. She had no visitors, no family, no photographs, and yet, she felt less alone than she ever had in the marble silence of her father's palace. Each day, she rose early, made tea, stared at the sky until the world softened. Then she wrote. She didn't plan to write a book. It just happened. The words fell from her like dust shaken from ancient curtains. Her fingers couldn't keep up. She wrote in short bursts, like her soul was leaking out in ways, not as fiction, not as drama. Just truth. She called it The Ones Who Remembered. Not once did she mention her name, her country, her religion. But everyone who read it knew exactly who she was, because they had been her to. The book spread like breath on glass. Slow, foggy, but impossible to ignore. Some called it revolutionary. Some called it dangerous. Some called it blasphemy. And yet, it kept spreading. People sent letters from across the globe. Women who had been silenced by tradition. Men who had escaped systems that asked them to bury their softness. Queer youth whose voices had been caged in fear. Survivors of spiritual abuse. Children raised in silence. Now grown and ready to scream. They didn't write to thank her. They wrote to tell her. Now I remember too. But not everyone was grateful. There were threats. Messages laced with venom. Accusations that she was corrupting values, spitting on her homeland, poisoning minds. Some demanded her identity. Others demanded her death. She changed addresses 3 times in for months. But she didn't stop writing. She couldn't. Because every word was a stone pulled from her own throat. And every letter she received was proof that others were doing the same. She started giving talks, always under different names. Always in cities where no one knew her face. She didn't stand behind podiums or PowerPoints. She sat in circles. Lit candles. And told the truth like it was a story passed down from the beginning of time. She told them not about death, but about what comes after you've died and lived again. She said, "I didn't come back with answers. I came back with memory." And they listened, not because she spoke loudly, but because her voice trembled with something older than certainty. Still, loneliness hovered. Not the old loneliness of being misunderstood. This was different. This was the loneliness of someone who had touched the other side and couldn't unsee it. She would walk through crowded markets and see people like flickers, beautiful, chaotic, but sleeping. She wanted to shake them, to whisper in their ears, "You are more than this, don't forget." But she knew better. Truth wasn't a door you could force open. It had to be remembered, chosen, stepped into, just like she had done once in a small cafe. In Lisbon, a woman approached her after a talk. She looked ordinary, jeans, notebook, coffee-stained fingers, but her eyes looked like they had seen the light. She sat across from Lena and said nothing for a long time. Then, with a shaking voice, "You wrote about a woman with silver eyes." Lena nodded. "She came to me too," the woman whispered. Silence fell between them like reverence. Then the woman asked, barely audible, "Do you think we're crazy?" And Lena, without hesitation, smiled. "No, I think we finally woke up." As the years passed, Lena built a life not from bricks, but from echoes. A whisper here, a talk there, a letter, a fire, a remembering. She taught others how to listen, not to her, but to the voice behind their ribs. She didn't create a movement. She simply left a trail. Others followed. Some quietly, some defiantly, and some never returned to the world they came from. But none forgot, not after hearing her story. One afternoon, she received a package with no return address. Inside, a photograph. It was old, blurred at the corners. A girl in white, standing in front of a golden gate. She turned it over. On the back, one sentence in delicate handwriting. "She still lives inside you." She stared at it for a long time. Then she wept, not from sadness, but from recognition. Not everything that dies is meant to be buried. Some things die to be reborn in flame. Her final public appearance was in Istanbul, in a modest hall with velvet chairs and paper lanterns. She wore white. Her hair was silvering now, her voice quieter, but sharper. She didn't speak of miracles. She didn't mention the light, or the woman, or the pain. She simply said, I am not here to convince you. I'm here to remind you that forgetting is not the same as loss, and silence is not the same as peace." She looked out over the room. Hundreds of eyes met hers, some filled with tears, some filled with awe, some wide open, like they had just remembered where they came from. Freedom didn't bring peace. It brought exposure. Each morning, Lena woke in a foreign country with a borrowed name and a soul too vast for her chest. The apartment was small, no mirrors, just one window, a narrow bed, and a wooden desk. But for the first time in her life, solitude didn't feel like punishment. It felt like breath. She wrote because she had to. The words fell from her like a memory surfacing after a long submersion. She didn't plan a book. She wasn't trying to be heard. She was trying to release something that had been trapped for lifetimes. She called it The Ones Who Remembered. It spoke of silence, fire, and a woman with silver eyes. It spoke of forgetting, and then waking up. She didn't mention her name, or country, or past, but readers knew, because they had lived fragments of her story too. The book spread slowly, like breath on glass. People whispered about it in cafes and private message boards. Survivors of oppression. Women who were told to sit down and smile. Men aching from spiritual guilt. Children raised in fear. Now grown and voiceless, they didn't just read her. They recognized themselves in her. But not everyone was grateful. Threats arrived, veiled and loud. Accusations. Warnings. She changed apartments 3 times in a year. Still, she kept writing. Because silence was no longer an option. She began to speak quietly, in underground spaces, with flickering candles and small circles of listeners. She never shouted. She didn't preach. She just told the truth. "I didn't come back with answers," she would say. "I came back with memory." And people would lean in. Not because she was loud, but because something in her words made their bones tremble with forgotten truths. And yet, loneliness returned. Not the kind she'd known in her father's palace. This was the kind that visits those who have seen beyond the veil and must now live among the blind. She walked through cities full of sleepwalkers, people pretending, surviving, forgetting. Sometimes she wanted to shake them and whisper, "You're more than this." But she didn't. You can't force someone to remember. They must choose. In Lisbon, after one of her talks, a woman approached her. She had soft eyes and ink-stained fingers. "You wrote about a woman with silver eyes," she said. Lena nodded. "She came to me too," the woman whispered. They sat in silence. Then the woman asked, "Are we crazy?" Lena smiled. "No," she said. "We just woke up first." Years passed. Lena became a quiet current in the world. She didn't build a movement. She left a trail. Letters, talks, unnamed stories passed between hands and hearts. She lived small. She lived free. And every now and then, someone would find her not because they were looking for her, but because they were looking for themselves. One day, she received an envelope with no return address. Inside, a photograph of a girl standing in front of a golden gate. On the back, written in delicate script, "She still lives inside you." She stared at it for a long time, then smiled, because she knew now, not everything that dies must stay buried. Some things die to be reborn in flame. Her final public appearance was quiet. No stage, just a room full of strangers who were ready to remember. She stood in white. Her voice calm, weathered, steady. "I'm not here to teach you," she said. "I'm here to remind you." And for a long moment, the room held its breath. Then she added, softly, "Your silence is not your fault, but your voice is your responsibility." No applause, just stillness. And in that stillness, dozens of souls began to burn quietly, just like she once had. There are stories we are born knowing, not with our minds, but with our bones. Stories that live beneath the surface of silence. Stories that echo in our skin when we pass someone who looks into us instead of at us. Stories we forget in order to survive. But remember, when it's finally safe to breathe. This was Lena's story. And perhaps it's yours too. She never returned to the country of her birth. Not because she couldn't, but because she no longer needed to. The girl who once bowed her head in golden rooms had been transformed, not into someone else, but into someone fully herself. She never claimed to be enlightened. She didn't preach, convert, or argue. She simply told the truth as she had lived it. And somehow, in the quiet echo of her words, others began to remember who they were before. The silence set in. On the last page of her final journal, she wrote, "You are not your obedience. You are not your pain. You are not the fear they buried into your name. You are what burned beneath it all, and still does." One morning, years later, a young woman found herself on a quiet street in Istanbul, standing outside a door she hadn't planned to knock on. She had read a story once, an anonymous book. It spoke of a field, a mirror, a woman with silver eyes. She thought it was fiction. Until she dreamed the same dream, until she began to remember things no one had told her. Something guided her to that street. A whisper, a vibration. Or maybe it was simply time. She knocked. The door creaked open. No one was there. Just a candle lit on the floor and a folded paper on the table. She stepped inside, opened the note. It read, "If you made it here, it's because you never forgot. Even when they tried to make you, even when they told you silence was your safest prayer. But you are not silence. You are song. You are the beginning of your own fire." She sat down. And wept. Not for the pain, but for the remembering. Maybe Lena was never meant to stay. Maybe she was a match lit in the dark, just long enough to show others that they, too, could burn without being destroyed. The woman with silver eyes had told her once, "You're not lost. You're just waiting for your own voice to come home." And she did. And so will others, because remembering cannot be undone. And once you've tasted the truth behind your name, you never forget again. When she woke up, she remembered everything. The question is, will you?